Okay, welcome everybody to Soul Wrestling. We're going to be studying the book of Tanya. And the book of Tanya is a book with an agenda. It has a very direct and exact purpose that it's trying to get out of you. And that it is trying to make you into a holy person. That is what the book is about. That is what it is attempting to do. And anyone who studies Tanya is very likely to be affected by it. It is a very powerful work. It was written by the great Rabbi Zalman, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic school of thought. And in it he put all of his wisdom, all of his power, all of his energy into a rather brief book of 53 chapters. The chapters are divided by those who study it into sections. And we're going to look at the third section of Tanya in this series, where Rabbi Zalman attempts to reveal to us just how powerful our soul is. That even if we're aware of having a soul, even if we have that spiritual connection and that side to us, but not necessarily do we know what that soul contains, the powers that lie within it. And very often we can underestimate our own power. Rabbi Zalman, being a doctor of the soul, is able to unravel those powers that we have, and by allowing us to recognize them, give us the power to utilize them, to actualize them, and to fully enact the powers of our soul. And so that is the journey that we're going to embark upon over the next few weeks, please God. What the Tanya bases itself on a verse in the book of Deuteronomy that says that to serve God is something that is very close to you. That to serve God with a full-hearted service of God, to become a holy person, a person connected to God, is something that is very near to you. It is very available to you. And what Rabbi Zalman attempts to do is to explain why it's actually very near to us. Why something that seems very lofty, to be close to God, to be a holy person, an upright person, why that is something that is totally available to us and very clear to us, very, very near to us. This is something that Rabbi Zalman attempts to explain in depth. That we shouldn't feel that being a holy person, not just a good person, but a holy person, is out of our reach. Now, what's the difference between a holy person and a good person? Is there a difference between a holy person and a good person? Can you be good without being holy? Or holy without being good? What's the difference?
Maybe it's the intent. So a good person could be just walking and see an elderly lady who needed it across the road and lost. A holy person could be actively seeking it out to do a mitzvah or a good deed.
Okay, so you could be a good person who just waits for good things to happen upon you. If there are no old ladies crossing the street, then you don't need to do anything. Whereas a holy person seeks it out. Okay? Any other differences between holy and good?
Holy always does it with Hashem's will, sort of, I suppose having Hashem in mind for every act feels that it's a spiritual. I think you can do something in two different ways, and one can be with God in mind, and the other can just be just to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. So a good person does good, but a holy person does it with a higher intention, a higher connection. Yeah. Any other suggestions? Yeah.
Maybe a holy person does it more with the rituals of what you're supposed to be doing, and the good person does it not so much with the rituals in mind, but with the act of actually just doing a mitzvah, or doing the right thing.
Right, so you're saying that the good person has an advantage over the holy person. The holy person may be doing it to fulfill an obligation, whereas a good person does it out of the goodness of their heart. Okay. So I guess we need to understand what holy is in the first place. I mean, good is a word that we use quite commonly. Holy is a word that's not so common, I guess, in our language. So, we say like, that was a good joke, that was a good pizza, or that was a good time, or you're looking good today, but we don't use holy all that much. You're looking holy today, or that was a holy pizza. It's a less common word. It's not used as much in our language, but we do use it in our prayers, and we have it in sort of the religious lexicon. But do we actually know what holy means? What is holiness? What does it mean to be holy? We have a vague picture of it, but what actually is holiness? This is something that Rabbi Shneur Zalman wants to give us a much deeper familiarity with holiness. That being good is good, but it's not enough to be good. We have to also be holy. It's not enough just to be holy, of course. A holy person has to be good, but we have to yearn to be holy as well. And that's what we're going to try and get to know a little bit better, what holiness is. And he's going to do this by explaining in this chapter what is unique about being Jewish in this context. That there is goodness that is universal, and there is a holiness that is a particular Jewish mission. That we know in Judaism there's the idea that every single human being has a soul, and every single human being has a mission, and every single human being has to bring goodness into the world. But at the same time, there is a particular Jewish mission within the context of the universal mission. There's something about being Jewish. And in this chapter, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to attempt to give an understanding of the Jewish role, the particular Jewish role in being holy, in attempting to reach a level of holiness. And he's going to give us a profound understanding in that. And before we get into that, it is important for us to recognize and to appreciate that Rabbi Shneur Zalman is presenting an idea that being Jewish is a gift, is something special. It's not something that is a racial issue. Anybody from any race can be Jewish. It's not something that you have to be born into. Anyone who chooses can choose to join the Jewish people. It's not an exclusivity, but it's a specialness, it's a gift, it's a privilege. There's something unique about being Jewish. If there's a unique Jewish mission to bring holiness into the world, so then there must be something unique about being Jewish. Otherwise, anyone could fulfill that mission. And so Rabbi Shneur Zalman attempts to explain what is the shape of the Jewish soul, what is unique about the Jewish soul, what's special about being Jewish. Now, there are some people who don't like to talk about Jewish people as being special. They're called Jews. Jewish people, they're not comfortable with saying the Jewish people are special. Everyone else in the world seems to say that we're special, either for the better or for worse, but that we're special, we're unique, we're different. Jewish people are always arguing that we're just like everybody else, that we're no different. But that itself is quite a special thing about the Jewish people. There is something unique about being Jewish, and anybody can recognize that there's something special about being anything. But if you're Jewish, there's a specialness, there's a uniqueness to the Jewish person. There's something about the Jewish people. There's a connection we feel with the Jewish people all around the world. There's a special history that we share. There's a unique story of the Jewish people, and there's a special place that we have in the world. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman argues is that specialness, it comes from somewhere. There's a reason why the Jewish people are special and unique, and it's not just a historical accident, but it's something to do with our mission. It's something to do with what we are supposed to bring to the world. There's something special about the Jewish people. If you read what people have said about the Jewish people, you find that we are a topic of conversation. Throughout history, there's been those who've tried to examine, to understand, to place what are the Jewish people in the world? What are they about? What makes them tick? Not only Jewish people have explored this, but many non-Jews have as well. And so, before we get into Rabbi Shneur Zalman's explanation of the unique Jewish role and its bearing on holiness and becoming a holy person, I want to look at what some non-Jews have said about the Jewish people. Before we see Rabbi Shneur Zalman's opinion, an insider, a Jewish person describing the Jewish soul, let's look at some non-Jews and what they have said about the Jewish people. Because there's a verse in Proverbs that says, "Let a stranger praise you, not your own mouth." Meaning, what you say about yourself is one thing, but what somebody else says about you is even more telling. And so by examining what some great thinkers of the non-Jewish world have said about the Jewish people, we will then get into what Rabbi Shneur Zalman has to say on this topic. Now, of course, an opinion on the Jewish people, not all opinions are positive, and people have written horrible things about the Jewish people. That's not so surprising. What's surprising are those other nations who have recognized the uniqueness of the Jewish people. Now, you could write this and say this about any nation, the specialness and the uniqueness about any nation. Our topic is the Jewish one. And so I want to have a look at a few famous non-Jewish statements about the Jewish people before we get into the Tanya itself. The first one is from the second president of the United States. His name was John Adams. And he wrote the following: I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize man than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that chance had ordered the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist to the other sect, who believed or pretended to believe that all is ordered by chance, I should believe that chance has ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be, can't see what that says. Anyone know it off by heart? Which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality, and consequently of all civilization. So again, that the Jews, their mission is to propagate and to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization. That's quite a nice thing to say about the Jewish people, that the civilization, morality, is in the hands of the Jewish people. This was an American president. Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, he looks a bit Jewish there, but he's not. And he also had a lot to say about the Jewish people. He wrote, "The Jew is that sacred being who has brought down from heaven the everlasting fire and has illuminated with it the entire world. He is the religious source, spring and fountain out of which all the rest of the peoples have drawn their beliefs and their religions. The Jew is the emblem of eternity, he who neither slaughter nor torture of thousands of years could destroy. He who neither fire nor sword nor inquisition was able to wipe off the face of the earth. He who was the first to produce the oracles of God. He who has been for so long the guardian of prophecy and has transmitted to the rest of the world. Such a nation cannot be destroyed. The Jew is as everlasting as eternity itself." Amazing. I mean, this, how does that compare to the one before, to John Adams, saying the same thing? What did John Adams say?
Identifying God in the world as the moral foundation.
This is about contribution forever.
Yeah. So John Adams seemed to say that the bedrock of morality comes from the Jewish people and their conception of God, their teaching of God. He said this, a similar thing as well, being the oracles of God, but he said that the guardian of prophecy and such a nation cannot be destroyed, that they are everlasting, they're eternity itself. It's almost like a mystical view of the Jewish people. I mean, when we read this stuff as Jews, so what do we feel? Pride? Anything else? Responsibility? Any other feelings? Or?
We've been given a gift.
Mm-hmm. What about a bit of doubt?
Yeah, a bit of confusion.
Like, he means me? Like, who's he talking about again? Like, who's the oracle of God? Guardian of prophecy? As everlasting as eternity itself? Like, I'm just a normal guy. Like, who's he talking about? You know, very poetic and everything, but this is talking about me? It's talking about my friends? Like, you know, who is this? It's on the one hand very exciting for us in a way to hear from a non-Jew, a respected non-Jew, to say such a thing. It's humbling. It's also a little bit confusing. Like this is us. Like we're just like people like everybody else, and yet that's what Tolstoy said. That's what he thought. Okay, let's look at another one. William Rees-Mogg, editor-in-chief of the Times of London and a member of the House of Lords, and a very respected thinker in England, said the following: "One of the gifts of the Jewish culture to Christianity is that it has taught Christians to think like Jews. And any modern man who has not learned to think as though he were a Jew can hardly be said to have learned to think at all. Imagine a Jew said that. You'd be in big trouble. And he's not a Jew. That if you have not learned to think as a Jew, you can hardly have said to be learned to think at all.
But isn't that kind of saying what common thinkers?
Sorry?
It's like we have common thought process.
What is if all Jews think alike?
No, well, firstly, no, but more that if someone hasn't learned to think like a Jew, they haven't learned to think at all. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Free thinkers, you mean?
What does think like a Jew mean?
Free thinkers.
How do Jews think differently to other people?
Ability to argue with one another, I think.
To argue, yeah. To argue, to question.
Question.
What only Jews did this? Maybe. I mean, when you're in your way of thinking, you assume that everybody else thinks like you think, right? We all think that way. We all think that our way of thinking everyone else shares, which is why we don't understand why everyone else is getting it wrong all the time. But in actual fact, people think differently, and cultures think differently. We, as Jews, are used to a certain way of thinking, of questioning, of debating, of analyzing. That's not necessarily the inheritance of every culture. And even though I guess the modern culture that we live in, and Western culture, has inherited that way of thinking, it not necessarily is a universalistic idea. There are people still today who are unable to question what they're taught, who don't have that way of thinking of rationally wondering, is this right or wrong, or analysing in that way. They haven't received it. And so according to Rees-Mogg, if you haven't learned to think like a Jew, you haven't learned to think at all. That thinking is a Jewish thing. I know, I'd be too scared to say it, but that's what he said. Let's look at another one. Paul Johnson is a modern American historian who's written the history of the Jews, as well as many other history books. He hasn't only written about the Jews. But what he has to say is the Jewish vision became the prototype for many similar grand designs for humanity, both divine and man-made. The Jews therefore stand at the center of the perennial attempt to give human life the dignity of a purpose. So he's saying that the Jewish people didn't only contribute religious thought, spiritual thought, godly thought, but man-made ideas as well. It's the Jewish vision that became the prototype for that became the impetus for that. The ability to have purpose, to move ahead, to invent, to progress. That is a Jewish idea. Which again, coming from the world we live in, where progress is an invention and is just a given, we don't appreciate the fact that in many cultures, still today, and certainly in ancient cultures, there was no belief in progress. There was no sense that history was going anywhere, that there was a purpose, that there was a mission, that anything was going to happen. Many cultures, even still today, believe in a cyclical history, or time is a cycle, going around in circles. What was will be and will be again, and nothing changes. The idea of time as having a purpose, a direction, that there's something we're aiming towards, that is a new idea that came about through the prophets of Israel. It's a Jewish idea. And so to give human life the dignity of a purpose, that we're living for a purpose, for a meaning, that, says Paul Johnson, is a Jewish idea that the world has based its ideas on. So far, what have we got? The idea of God is one thing. The idea of eternity, that the Jewish people are the ones who teach how to think. The Jewish people have brought the idea of purpose into the world. Quite a lot of big stuff here. Another one is Matthew Arnold, a British poet and critic, said, as long as the world lasts, all who want to make progress in righteousness will come to Israel for inspiration, as to the people who had the sense for righteousness most glowing and strongest. Meaning it's not just once upon a time Israel was the source of righteousness, but in all times, as long as the world lasts, it will be, you have to come to Israel. I don't think he means geographical Israel, the country Israel, but he means Israel as the people for righteousness, because they're the people who the sense of righteousness most glowing and strongest. So here we're not talking about intellect anymore, or God necessarily. We're talking about righteousness, goodness. The idea of righteousness comes from Israel, and everybody has to go back to that to find righteousness. I don't think he's saying that no one else is righteous, but the vision of righteousness, it came from Israel, from the prophets of Israel. And another one here, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, a German writer and statesman, who said the following: every Jew, no matter how insignificant, is engaged in some decisive and immediate pursuit of a goal. It is the most perpetual people of the earth. Now, this quote is a bit different as well, because here he's not talking anymore about Israel, about the nation or the history of the prophets. He says every Jew, no matter how insignificant, is engaged in some decisive and immediate pursuit of a goal. Now, I mean, obviously that's a preposterous, to make such a generalization that every single Jew is, but he wasn't a fool. This is what he says, that Jews are in pursuit of some type of goal. Now, you would question that. First of all, surely there are some Jews who are purposeless, not going anywhere. And certainly there are many people, isn't everyone pursuing some goal of some description? Whereas he's saying, no, every Jew, no matter how insignificant. What does insignificant mean? Like, we're not talking here about the great inventors or prophets of Israel. We're talking about just any average Jew. There's some goal they've got. They're heading somewhere. They're going somewhere. Again, this is not something to be taken for granted. The idea that there's a goal, that there's a purpose, that what is now does not have to be, that you can conceptualize a better world, a better state, things going higher. That is, he says, that's the Jewish drive, the most perpetual people on earth. Finally, Mark Twain wrote a very famous essay concerning the Jews. And he says, if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests, I'm sure we're less than that. It suggests a nebulous, dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also a way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in the world, in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? So, in beautiful prose there, Mark Twain describes this Jewish survival, the fact that these great nations have disappeared and that we have stood fast, stood firm. And he ends it with a question. What is the secret of his immortality? And that's a great question. What is the secret of his immortality? And you can ask this of all the statements that have been made. What's the secret of it? What is it about the Jewish people that even somebody can say this about us? That it's even possible to say? Again, we sit here saying, oh, I don't know if that means me. But if the fact that these things could even be said about the Jewish people, what is the secret of his immortality? What is the secret of this unique Jewishness? And what is the common theme in all of these thinkers? What are they all saying about the Jewish people? If you note, I mean, I'm sure there are many other people who have said stuff about Jewish people, but there seems to be a common theme throughout these ones. And it seems that these are the type of things that people will say if they're talking positively about the Jewish people. Note, none of them spoke about sporting prowess. Now, it's not that there aren't Jews that are very sporting. There are. There are very, very sporty Jews. I know some. And they can do very well. But for some reason, that's not the hallmark of the Jewish people. That's never been it. We've never been the nation of bodybuilders as an identity. There are Jewish bodybuilders, but that's just not what we're unique for. I guess there are other nations that are better at that. Here, there seems to be a theme throughout. What is unique about the Jewish soul and the Jewish people? What do we have that we've brought the world more than anybody else? What's the common denominator here? Do you see it? Is there a common denominator? What are they all saying? Could we summarize it in a word? What they're all saying? Morality? Sorry? Progress? Education? Thinkers? Eternity?
Like materialism, mortality, eternity.
What about an intricate part of our existence in this universe? They're there, we're here, you'll find us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Intelligence. So I think if I would put it into one word, what all of them are saying, I think I would use the word transcendence. That there's something that the Jewish people have brought to the world, and that is transcendence. Transcendence, what I mean by that, is not floating, not levitation, but a sense of something beyond, of something higher. In all aspects, in all areas of life, there is something beyond that we can reach, that we can yearn for, that we can strive for. That we don't have to be stuck in the here and now, in the current surroundings, in what we see in front of us, but there is a sense of something more, that the world can progress to something that it is not yet, that a person can strive to be higher than you are now, that the world has a force behind it that is more than the concrete and the black and white and the here and now. There is a sense of transcendence that the Jewish people have brought to the world. And that has allowed progress. That has allowed critical thinking and questioning. That has allowed growth and a yearning and a search for righteousness. That has brought God into the world. That's what it really means, bringing God into the world. Bringing something bigger, a transcendent sense. Transcendence, of course, exists in any spirituality, but bringing transcendence into the world is a little bit different. There's the idea that there's something out there, and we can try and reach it or go there. But looking at transcendence as being separate from the world, that's not unique to Judaism. That is common of all spiritualities. And if you look at most spiritual disciplines, even ones that precede Judaism, they were about trying to leave this world and go to a higher state. The Jewish vision is bringing transcendence into the world, which means making transcendence a part of our reality. That's a different idea. And that's something that's uniquely Jewish. No one else tried that one. So these ideas, I think we're going to see explained beautifully in chapter 18 of Tanya, which is what we're going to look at this evening, that talks about something about the peculiar Jewish soul, something particular about the Jewish soul. As I said earlier, everyone has a soul, but there's a Jewish soul. There's a Jewish shape of a soul. There's something unique about the Jewish soul that has allowed us to bring this vision into the world. Let's have a look into the words of Tanya. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says that the patriarchs attained the level of being a chariot to the divine will, and therefore they merited transmitting to their descendants after them for all times a soul from the 10 holy sfirot of the 4 worlds at Tzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, to each according to his station and according to his works. Meaning, let's translate, that Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is describing an achievement that our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, what they achieved, that the stories that we tell about the beginnings of the Jewish people, the family that started the Jewish people, is not simply because this is our history. It's because the founders of Judaism, they didn't just reach a level of holiness for themselves, but they became an identity of holiness. The Kabbalistic terminology used for it is that they became a chariot to the divine will. What that means is that a person can have their own will, or a person can bow to somebody else's will. I can do what I want, or you can ask me to do something and I'll do what you want. Not everything I do is what I decided to do. Some things I do is because somebody else has asked me to do it. So if I go and make myself dinner because I'm hungry, I want to go and eat dinner. If you ask me on your way, can you please pick me up dinner? I didn't want to do that. You asked me to do it, I'll do it for you. You want it, so I'll do it for you. I can do things for myself, I can do things for you. I can do what I want, I can do what you want. So too in our relationship with God, we can say, I'm doing what I want, or we can say, okay, God wants it, so I'll do it for him. The forefathers and foremothers, the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Jewish people, Abraham and Sarah were the first to do this. They reached a level where it wasn't their will versus God's will. It was that they became a chariot for the divine will. They reached a level of alignment with the divine will to such an extent that they could be like a chariot. What's a chariot? Chariot means a vehicle, a car. A vehicle does not go where it wants because it doesn't have a want. It has no desire of its own. It goes where the driver drives it without any say in the matter whatsoever. It's not that it overcomes its will to go where you want. It has no will other than your will. When you're sitting in a chariot or in a car, so you direct it where you want, not against its will, not with its will. It's your will, and that's all there is. It is nothing more than a vehicle to take you where you want. It doesn't have a mind of its own. The patriarchs and matriarchs reached a level of alignment with the divine will where that's where they were. Their every move was what God wanted. They were so aligned with the divine will, it wasn't a struggle to overcome what they wanted to do what God wanted. They naturally, innately moved with the divine will. This is illustrated very interestingly in one of the well-known stories about the first patriarch, Abraham. We know that one of the things that Abraham was asked to do by God was to bring his son as a sacrifice. Isaac, who had been born when Abraham was 100 years old, Sarah was 90. They'd finally been blessed with a child, and they were told to bring him as a sacrifice. God told Abraham, bring him as a sacrifice to me. Now we know the end of the story, that it was just a test. But Abraham did not know that. Abraham thought he was being told by God to bring his son as a sacrifice. This was against everything he'd ever taught. He had taught that human sacrifice is wrong. God wants us to live a moral, good life. And child sacrifice was very common in the ancient world. It was considered a normal religious act. Abraham taught it was not. It's murder, it's wrong, you can't take an innocent life. That's not what God wants. This is what Abraham taught. And then God tells him, I want you to bring your son as a sacrifice to me. The ultimate test, are you going to listen to God's will even when it goes against what you thought God's will was? And we know Abraham went up, lifted the knife, and was ready to do it. But the Torah recounts that when Abraham was ready to slaughter his son, it says he sent his hand with the knife to slaughter his son. He sent his hand. What does it mean he sent his hand? You don't send your hand, you send something outside of you, you don't send your hand somewhere. What does it mean he sent his hand to slaughter? It means that Abraham naturally, innately, instinctively did not want to go through with this. He didn't want to do it. It was totally against everything he believed, but it was also against his instincts to do it. And Abraham knew that his instincts were in line with the divine will. He was a chariot. Every move he made was what God wanted. And yet his hand refused to budge to lift up the knife to slaughter his son. So now he had a real test. Do I follow my instinct, which always gets it right, always does what God wants, or do I listen to what God told me to do? He was totally confused. None of us would have this problem. The rest of us, our instincts can be very selfish. and not what God wants. But Abraham, his instincts were what God wants. And so here, his instinct was telling him not to do it, but God told him to do it. And so he had to force his hand to do it. In the end, the angel comes down and says, okay, you passed the test, you don't need to do it. And then it made all sense. Now I know why my hand refused to budge, because God did not want me to slaughter my son. But I had to force myself to try and do it, to pass the test, to listen to him against my instincts. That's because Abraham had reached a level where his impulses were divine. His automatic moves were divine. Everything he did was according to the divine will. He was a chariot. Now, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, when a person reaches that level of alignment with the divine, then they become like a new being. It's almost like a mutation of the species, that they've become beyond what a human is normally, a human separate from God. They've become totally aligned with God. This is what Abraham and Sarah reached. And so, therefore, they merited to transmit that to their descendants. The descendants of Abraham and Sarah, the forefathers and the foremothers of the Jewish people, also receive a soul that has a similar impulse, a divine impulse, a sense of the divine, a unity, a oneness with God. Each according to his station and according to his works. The terminology here, in this, he says that the soul comes from the 10 holy sphirot, which are the 10 emanations of God, the 4 worlds are spiritual worlds, meaning each soul comes from some place within the divine map. There's many different levels in the Kabbalistic writings of divine energy. Every soul that descends from Abraham and Sarah is a soul that belongs in that map somewhere. Each one according to their station, according to their level, but each of them come from the world of holiness and therefore have a divine impulse within them. He's going to explain this further so we can understand it a bit more. Even the lowliest of lowly men and the sinners of Israel are thus endowed with, at the very least, the lowest grade of holy soul. Nevertheless, since it is of the 10 holy sphirot, it is compounded of them all, including the highest level of soul called Chokhmah, which usually translates as wisdom, which is illuminated by the light of the blessed Ein Sof, the Infinite One itself. Thus the blessed Ein Sof, the Infinite One, is garbed, as it were, in the wisdom of the soul, whatever sort of Jew he may be. Meaning that even if somebody doesn't have the highest energetic soul, even if somebody's not all that spiritually in tuned, even if they're the lowest of the low, but if you are a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so then you have a spark of divine energy that is beyond you, that is not just you, it is divine, it is holy. It is called the Chokhmah of the soul, the wisdom of the soul, which doesn't mean wisdom, intellect, it means a appreciation of transcendence, of beyondness. It is something that because the forefathers and foremothers lived a life like that, they changed their DNA, as it were, to the point where the souls that descend from them inherit this divine impulse. And so the most bizarre thing comes out of this, that you have inherited spirituality. You have an inherited spiritual bent. You have a streak in the family that goes down all the way, that there is some niggling part of our soul that seeks beyondness, transcendence. And that, Rabbi Shneur Zalman terms as being Chokhmah, the Chokhmah of the soul, the level of awareness of other, of transcendence, that we have inherited, no matter what type of soul the person may be, even if they're a lowly type, not the greatest person. We're not saying here that you're necessarily good, but there's something in the soul, an impulse in the soul that tends towards holiness. Now he explains a little bit further. Chokhmah is the source of intelligence and comprehension, and it is above Bina, which is intellectual understanding and comprehension. This is something that Rabbi Shneur Zalman in earlier chapters described, that we have several intellectual capacities. The two main ones are Chokhmah and Bina. Chokhmah being conceptualization, Bina meaning comprehension. He explains here, a little bit deeper, that really in our mind we have two very different capacities. The capacity to comprehend, which is intellectual capacity. We also have in our mind the capacity to abstract, to sense something that is beyond intellect, to go beyond the confines of logic, of rationale, and sense something beyond. It is a part of our mind only in that our mind is our highest faculty, but it's not limited to the mind. I want to spend a few moments explaining this a bit deeper, a bit clearer. When discussing faith, particularly in the world we live in today, there's a lot of debate and discussion about faith. And usually the discussion is couched in terms of science versus religion, or rational, logical thinking versus faith, as if you have to choose between one or the other. Either you look at the world rationally and logically, and looking at it rationally and logically, there is no evidence for God's existence. There is no logical argument to say that there's a higher being. We're yet to discover anything, and so logic dictates that there is no God. You either take that path, which is logical, or you are unscientific, you reject logical, rational thinking, and you, on blind faith, say, no, there is a God. Just because we can't understand, it's beyond. We don't need to understand. Logic can't take us there. And so it's almost like you have to make a choice between being a scientific type or a faith type. Which are you into? Are you logical, or you reject logic and be a believer? This is not the Jewish way of thinking. That in all Jewish writings, scientific discovery is encouraged, in fact is seen as a divine pursuit. To study the universe, to study the world, using logic, using rationale, using the human mind, is seen as a way to find God. If you look at the wonders of the universe, you'll find God there as well. But that's nothing to do with faith. That is using your divine power of intellect. There's a separate divine power in our mind, and that is to appreciate that which is beyond intellect, to transcend intellect. It's another feature of the mind. It's not anti-logic, it's not illogical, it's supra-logic, it's beyond logic, it's higher, it's a different discipline altogether. It's also not necessarily emotional. It's not just a feeling, it is a sense the mind has of something that is beyond it. One of the great Hasidic thinkers, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, he puts it in a fascinating way. He says that there's a well-known contradiction. If God knows the future, how can we have free choice? The old question, which is one of those old quandaries, that if God knows what I'm going to choose, so then I don't have free choice. It's preordained, because I could not have done it. On the other hand, if I do have free choice, if I could go either way, then God doesn't know what I'm going to do, so then he's not all-knowing. What type of God is that? So we've got a contradiction. Does God know the future? Then I don't have free choice. If I really have free choice, then God must not know the future, because I could have done something else. He didn't know. It's a contradiction. And there's a great many writings and fascinating approaches and answers to this. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says that this is a contradiction that one should ponder and never answer. Because there are certain things that we need to not understand with our logic, we need to apprehend with our super logic. That we need to appreciate that there are things that are beyond understanding, and they can stay there, and that's okay, and we should get involved in it. Meaning, don't just say, well, it's a contradiction, we can't answer it, so next topic. No, delve into that topic and discover just how wondrous it is and how much you cannot understand. Get into things that are beyond your understanding, because that, he says, fertilizes your mind. By stretching your mind into topics that are beyond understanding, you actually heighten your intellectual capacity. Not because you're going to understand it, but because you appreciate what is beyond intellect. And so much of Hasidic study is taking topics that are just beyond the cusp of understanding and delving into those topics. Because our mind has two features. It has Chokhmah, the appreciation of that which is beyond rationale and logic, and it has Bina, comprehension, the power to understand logic. And we need to use both. Faith is that part of our awareness that can perceive that which is beyond logic. It's a muscle in the brain, faith, that we have to not reject logic to accept something we don't understand, but to go higher than logic and appreciate something that is beyond. That is where faith is. It's called the Chokhmah, translated as wisdom, but incorrectly translated as wisdom. Chokhmah is the power to conceptualize the transcendent, that which is beyond. It's that experience where you hear something and you know it's true and you don't understand it, but you know it's true. And not just because of conviction or stubbornness, it's a sense of truth, a sense of reality that is beyond what you can explain. That is the power of Chokhmah. And this is what we've inherited from the forefathers and the foremothers. Rabbi Shneur Zalman mentions the word Chokhmah and defines it a little bit clearer. It's not wisdom, but he says, note the etymological composition of the word. Chokhmah in Hebrew can be divided into Chokhmah, which means the potentiality of what is. Chokhmah, the potentiality of what is. That which is not yet comprehended and understood or grasped intellectually. It's not yet within the realm of intellect. It's beyond that cusp. It's just beyond there. It's floating over the mind rather than resting in the mind. Consequently, there is vested in it the light of the Ein Sof, blessed be He, who can in no way be comprehended by any thought. Meaning we can relate to God, to the Ein Sof, to infinity, with that faculty of ourselves that is not finite, that is not bound by logic. It's a part of us and yet beyond us. Now, if you are reading this and listening to this and not understanding what's going on, that's also okay, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that thing that can't quite be understood. It's not like any other object. If we were here having a biology lesson and talking about the brain, so we can dissect the brain and look at it and define it and see what it is. Here we're talking about a spiritual capacity in the brain. It's not something that can be looked under a microscope and examined and defined. It's that indefinable quality in the mind, that sense of something greater, of something bigger, of something beyond. That's the part of us that can actually grasp God, because it's not limited by us. To put it a little bit differently, to try and bring it down to some level of understanding. Very often people have said to me they would like to have faith, but they just can't. They would like to believe in God, but they've tried. It just doesn't work for them. They just don't have it. They feel that some people are spiritually in tune and just get it. Others just don't. I would like to believe, but I wasn't taught it. It wasn't ingrained in me. It hasn't happened yet. What should I do to start believing? And this is coming from people who really want to believe. They say, I'm jealous of people who believe. I look around and I see what faith is, and I see the beauty and the depth that it brings to life. I just can't get it myself. Where can I get it from? How can I inject it in myself? What can I do to make it happen in me? Is there a book that I can read? Or is there a lecture I can listen to? Or can somebody lock me in a room and just give it to me somehow to get this faith? What would you answer? Is there a way to get faith? Does it just come? You have to wait? Is there a technique? How do people come to faith? Does a tragedy have to happen to you? Or you have to win the lottery? Or a miracle happen to you? So I don't think anyone has come to real faith through being convinced, through somebody arguing proofs that God exists and looking at the proofs and saying, yeah, I can't argue, God must exist, I have faith. I don't believe anyone has reached true faith through that. I don't believe it comes through reading a book that proves in 10 different ways why there must be a God. I don't think true faith comes from that. It does come from experience, sometimes tragedy, sometimes miracles. It does come from that. Faith comes from experiencing this Chokhmah level of your soul, which means the level of your transcendence. It doesn't come from asserting yourself. It comes from humbling yourself and having a sense of something beyond, something outside of you. As long as you are chasing faith, you are searching for it, you're trying to figure it out, that's all about you. You'll never find it. The moment that you let go of something, let go of that self, and open yourself to the level that is transcendent within you, then faith is there all along. You didn't have to go and get it from somewhere. It's there already. That is the Chokhmah of the nefesh.
Surrender.
A level of surrender. Yep. Yeah, correct. And so, in other words, but you're not surrendering to somebody else. There's a part of you that is beyond you. There's that part of your personality, yourself, your soul, your mind that has an appreciation of that which is beyond. This is called the Chokhmah shebenefesh, the level of Chokhmah in the soul. And that is the level that can connect to the infinite, to God. As long as you're in your finite mind, you can only connect to the finite. When you connect to that which is beyond you, when you're outside of self, then that's where the infinite comes in. That's why when somebody goes through, God forbid, a tragedy, they may come to faith, because a tragedy shakes up your complacency. Or a miracle, because a miracle blows you away. But it doesn't have to be one of those extremes. It can be an exercise in being open, in surrender, in opening yourself to that level of your mind that it has an appreciation for that which is beyond. Not chasing it so much, not holding it so tight, but letting it come. This is what he's describing here as the Chokhmah shebenefesh, the power of Chokhmah in the soul. So, because this is inherited, anyone can reach this, but the Jewish people have inherited this from the forefathers and foremothers. So hence every Jew, man or woman, learned or illiterate, believes in God, since faith is beyond understanding and comprehension. Now, we'll talk about this, what he said. Every Jew believes in God. I think we could debate that one in a minute. Since faith is beyond understanding and comprehension, for the fool believes everything, but the prudent man understands. This is a verse in Proverbs. The fool believes everything, but the prudent man understands. Which means, a simple reading of that verse, the fool believes everything, but a prudent man understands, sounds like it's saying that a fool is gullible, believes everything, but a prudent man understands, checks out, analyzes, uses their mind. But Rabbi Shnei Zalman turns the verse around and says, with regard to the Holy One, blessed be He, who is beyond intelligence and knowledge, all are like fools in His blessed presence. As it is written, so brutish am I and ignorant, I am as a beast before you, yet I'm continually with you. Meaning that because I'm brutish and as a beast, I am continually with you, with God. What he's done here, Rabbi Shnei Zalman, is done a brilliant twist in our way of thinking. The fool believes everything. A foolish person believes everything, but a prudent man, a smart person understands, checks out. So he says, that's not insulting the fool. That's talking about the power of a fool. The power of a fool is to believe, not to be stuck in understanding. When you realize what a fool you are, meaning how your mind is so limited, how the human mind is so limited in its capacity in front of infinity, when you appreciate that you are the fool, then you can be before God. When you think you're the prudent one, when you think you're the wise one, when you think your mind can get everything, that's when you're limited to understanding and you cannot transcend it. You can't reach God. But when you realize the limitations of the mind, then you can be the fool before God, because we're all fools before God. And then you can be continually with Him. So this ability to recognize the limits of intellect and connect to that which is beyond intellect, this, he says, every Jew has this as a part of the shape of our soul. We have inherited it from our forefathers and mothers, and therefore every Jew believes in God. Now, of course, if you do a survey on Jews and belief in God, you come up with a different statistic to that. It's not talking about active belief, it's talking about the ability to believe. Faith is there. Faith is not something that needs to be found somewhere, it is innate. It is there in the DNA. Which could explain why even Jewish people who have no connection to religion, yet they are also on some type of mission. And some of the great thinkers of history have been Jews who are disconnected from their tradition, but yet they have some utopian drive. They're trying to bring the Messiah in a secular sense. That is still a Jewish idea and a Jewish ideal. And so you have great inventors, great philosophers, great political thinkers who have come up with all different philosophies and ideas of making the world better, of reaching utopia, even though they deny any sense of God. It's an act of faith. It's a faith impulse that is there. And that exists in the soul, and it cannot be destroyed. It'll never be lost. So again, this is not saying that faith is uniquely a Jewish thing. As those thinkers earlier said, faith is something the Jewish people brought to the world. The concept of God, the Jewish people brought to the world. All the gods that existed before were really made in humans' image. The idea of a transcendent God who's interested in this world, that's a Jewish view. And the idea that a person can reach higher and beyond our limitations, that is the Jewish drive. The idea that the world can reach a utopian end, it has a purpose, we're trying to get somewhere. This is what the Jewish soul brought into the world, because Abraham and Sarah lived a life that was so in line with the divine will that it changed the shape of their soul and their children forever. And so being born with a Jewish soul means being born with a restlessness that cannot be satisfied with the world as it is now. Doesn't matter what world it is, it's not good enough. It has to be better. And whether that will be translated into spiritual yearning, or whether it will be translated into political activism, or if it will be translated into business and trying to just make money, there'll be a restlessness at the core of the Jewish soul that will never be quieted. And this is the Jewish condition. This is why we're such complicated people. It is a drive in the soul. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman tells us that it also means that there's a spiritual impulse to the Jewish soul that can be tapped into. No matter how distant a person has become from spirituality, no matter how far they've gone, there is this yearning that just needs to be turned on, needs to be defined. And as soon as it's defined, as soon as it's directed, it will go flying. It will be ignited. This, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, is why the Torah says that to be a holy person is very near to us. It's very available to us. Because holiness, the real definition of holiness, is transcendence, is a sense of something beyond. If you have met a holy person, what makes that person a holy person? When you're in their presence, you sense a higher presence. It's not just about them. If you've been in a holy place, being in a holy place means sensing something beyond the place. If you've had a holy moment, it's a sense of something bigger. Anyone who's been, for example, to the Kotel, to the wall in Jerusalem, it's a holy place. What does it mean it's a holy place? Jerusalem, generally, is a holy city. Israel is a holy land. And the Temple Mount is the holiest of the holies. What does it mean? There's nothing particularly impressive about the place. It's nothing about the architecture or the size of it or the natural beauty that makes it special. There is a presence of something beyond. There is a sense of transcendence. The place is not about itself, it points upwards, it points beyond itself. That's what makes it holy. That's why when you go to Jerusalem, you feel a presence. What is it? It's a sense of something beyond. It's transcendence. That's what holiness is. If you're in the presence of a holy person, it's not the person that you're into, they point to something higher, and they lift you up with them. That's what holiness means. And so to be a holy person means to point upwards, to point beyond self, to point to something higher. All of those thinkers that we quoted earlier, when they were describing the Jewish people, they were all saying the same thing, that there's something about the Jewish people that has brought to the world a sense of something beyond, something higher. Whether it be the sense of God, prophecy, vision, the sense of a futuristic goal and purpose in life, a way of thinking that you're not stuck in the here and now, but you can think your way out of the situation. Whatever, all the various ways they described it are all saying the same thing, that the Jewish people brought a sense of transcendence to the world. And this, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is something that is intrinsic to the Jewish soul and about being Jewish. Anyone who is born Jewish or who has joined the Jewish people, it is experiencing this sense of transcendence. And so, therefore, until that sense of transcendence is fed, until it is allowed to be expressed, so then the Jewish soul is unactualized. It's waiting to be turned on. And what we're going to see in conclusion of today, that there's a transcendent impulse in the Jewish soul. We inherited it from our ancestors who mutated into God-searching beings. Abraham and Sarah and the forefathers and foremothers became mutated God-searching beings, and they bequeathed it to us. This means connecting to God is our nature and our inheritance, and therefore very close to us. It's an urge that is inborn. And until we tap into that urge, until we feed it, until we express it, until we allow that part of ourselves expression, we're going to be very frustrated beings, extremely frustrated, because this Jewish yearning, this transcendent impulse that we have, is not just a part of us; it's the deepest part of us. It is the essence of who we are, and so until we're connected to it, it's going to haunt us. Once we allow it expression, then it's going to define us. And what we're going to see next week, God willing, is how we can harness this Chokhmah of the soul to live a higher life. That it shouldn't just be this depth of our soul. How can we actually tap into it to influence our daily life, to live a higher life, to actually become holy people? That we'll see next week, God willing. Thank you. If anyone needs to go, we can go. Anyone has questions, you're welcome to ask any questions. Yeah, sure.
So, the forefathers, they are so aligned that their soul became more closer to God.
Yeah.
I always thought that, we all have one soul, and on Shabbat we get two souls. Besides from that, there's a certain amount of Jewish souls. So it's not about, my father giving his soul down to me. They're separate, there's a certain amount of Jewish souls. So, how can this one person or 8 people's actions relate to all the Jewish souls, not just that one soul?
Well, it is a very strange idea that a soul should be inherited, because we understand that our bodies, our physical DNA is inherited from our parents and grandparents, and we're a physical continuation of them. But here the idea is that the soul is also kept in the family type of thing. And so the Kabbalists describe it as being that in the times of the forefathers, all of that energy was contained in them, in these couples, in their family. And we are the unraveling of those souls in part. So each one of us is a part of their soul, an extension of their soul. So if you can imagine, in the times of Abraham and Sarah, so all the Jewish people were in potential inside them. Now, they are inside all the Jewish people. So there's a part of them in us. This is why in our prayers, the first prayer of what's called the Amidah, one of the central prayers, is Magen Avraham. We say a blessing that God guards Abraham, which means that he guards that spark of Abraham that is within us, within each of us. So the mathematics of it, in souls split into many different offshoots. So each one of us is a part of that original soul, but a section of it, a spark of it. Yeah? All right? Yeah?
Prior to that, Hashem knows who your potential soulmate is.
Okay, so the soulmate idea is a slightly different topic, that a soul, before it comes into the world, has male and female parts to it, 2 halves to it. It's split, and the male part born in a little boy and the female in a little girl at some stage, and then they grow up and search for each other and find each other eventually and unite. But beyond that, that's talking about an absolute soulmate. Beyond that, there are soul families. In other words, all Jewish souls are connected, but within that, there are Jewish subset families of souls that we're connected to. So, for example, you might meet somebody, male or female, and you just connect with them immediately, like as if you've known them forever. That could be because you're from a similar soul root, similar spark
vibration,
and so therefore you're connected on that level. So there are soul sort of families as well. And then the soul of somebody who converts to Judaism is a Jewish soul that got somehow on its journey was to come from the non-Jewish world and to reconnect to the Jewish world. So there's a Jewish spark that belongs to Abraham and Sarah, but got had to go on a detour. Its journey had to go into the non-Jewish world and come back to reconnect. Which is why when a person converts to Judaism, they choose a Hebrew name and they're called the son or the daughter of Abraham and Sarah. It's not just because they don't have Jewish parents, it's their Jewish parents are Abraham and Sarah. They're still connected to their biological parents, but Jewishly, they're directly connected to Abraham and Sarah. Okay. Next week we'll continue, God willing.